Now let's talk about part 3 of the book Karma. Topic is Karma Conversations. So let's talk about Sutra first. Sutra is, as far as the laws of existence are concerned, there is no good and bad, no crime and punishment. It is just that for every action there is a consequence. First questionnaire question is, Sadhguru, you say that our life is entirely of our making, but questions come up for which I have no answers. When I read a news report about a little girl being raped, for instance, can I really say that she deserved it because it is her karma? Sadhguru, no. Her karma, our karma. Sadhguru said, not her karma, it is our karma. Questionnaire, what does that mean? Sadhguru said, it is our karma. Karma does not mean God is sitting up there punishing bad people and rewarding good ones. There is no such thing. But what kind of society we live in? Is that not our collective karma? That we are living uninvolved in a society in which horrific things happen? Is that not our karma? If all of us live without any humanity in our hearts for all the atrocities going on around us, that is our karma. We get the societies we deserve. So don't think of it as her karma. Think of it as your karma. Inaction is also karma. You are asking this question because you read this disturbing news report. But if you have a little girl in your house, aren't you doing everything possible to make sure she is protected? Does that mean her safety is guaranteed? No. But you do not best to secure her protection. This is what we need to do for the entire society, for every little girl, wherever she is, and it is not impossible. In many ways, we have taken our collective destiny into our hand. Take a simple example. When there are floods in India during the monsoons, people now demand accountability from their respective municipal corporation. This is because they see the floods as their collective karma, not merely an act of God. They want the necessary action to be taken to safeguard the security of all citizens. Take another example. In 1947, the average life expectancy in India was 28 years. Today it is 74. This reason we live longer today is because some action has been taken. Society and the nation have done something to improve life expectancy in the country. Is this not our collective karma? So steps have been taken for which we can be happy. There are other areas that have not been adequately attended to in the world, like the safety of women and children, as you mentioned, for which we are also collectively responsible. If there is collective will, we can bring many things to some sense of order. With concerted and participatory action, much can be changed. But if you attribute all this to divine will, things will go on endlessly in the same way. It does not matter whether you can perceive how you shaped your collective karma or not. Just see yourself as the creator of your karma. If you see that this is your karmic wave, that this is your doing, the next moment will naturally be conscious. If you attribute your fortune to someone else, you will act only unconsciously. But if you see yourself as the creator of your karma, it will shape the way you think, feel and act. And you now realize you have the power to affect the lives of many others around you. But remember this, for every thought that you generate, there is a consequence. Don't ever try to fix the consequence. The consequence will happen anyway. It is not something you can control, but the process is your doing. If you manage the process well, the consequence will be good. You can be sure of that. Next question is, I have a friend who has lost his legs because he was affected by polio at birth. What kind of past karma could cause such a terrible consequence? Sadhguru answer, you are making the mistake again of interpreting karma as a system of reward and punishment. The first step is to see it as software, nothing more. Now 100 years ago, there were any number of polio affected children and adults everywhere in the world, but today those numbers have reduced dramatically because we are doing the right karma. What is the right karma? We are vaccinating our children. It is unfortunate that we did not know the importance of this earlier, but this ignorance was also our collective karma. It is good that we are doing something about it now. As far as the laws of existence are concerned, there is no good and bad, no crime and punishment. It is just that for every action there is a consequence. Actions may happen knowingly or unknowingly. So when you perform any action, only one question is relevant: are you ready for the consequences? If you can joyfully accept any consequence, do whatever you please. But if the consequences matter to you, you must perform conscious action. Now suppose you are driving with a drunk friend. If he crashes his car, you might also be seriously injured. If you were to say this is unfair, this is his karma not mine, it would be absurd. Your karma is that you were with a drunken friend. This is the way existence works. If you are in tune with it, it will not crush you. If you are not in tune with it, it will crush you. Now maybe you lost your legs because you were ignorant of polio, or you were with the drunk friend who happened to be driving, or you were ignorant of gravity and you were on the roof and you just walked off. The scenarios are different, but the consequence is basically due to your being in the wrong place at the given moment. How do any of us catch an infection? Simply by being in the wrong environment, or anyway an environment that's right for the virus and wrong for us. Now why are some people in the wrong place and some not? This may sound cruel and capricious to you, but this is the way life works. You may be a wonderful person, a great philanthropist, much loved by your family and friends, but today if you went and ate the wrong food, you will still get an infection. It will not spare you because you are a good man. It is time to stop thinking of good and bad. We urgently need sensible people on this planet now. People who will do the right thing with life. People who operate on the basis of life sense. We did not know many things about illness in the past. We did not know how we contracted many diseases or how to treat them, whether it was cholera, plague or polio. Slowly we have understood how to tackle them, but there are still other diseases we do not know how to handle. It is sad that many people have already paid the price for our ignorance, but at least we are doing something to alter our collective karma. Now without trivializing your friend's condition in any way, I want you to see that advantage and disadvantage are only by comparison. Suppose none of us had legs, we would all be crawling around quite okay. It is because most people have legs that we believe that one who does not will suffer. If no one had eyes, we could not consider blindness a problem. But now comparing oneself to someone else is the problem, and that is the karma. It is time we stopped focusing on disadvantage. Can all of us perform the same type of physical and mental activity? No. Someone can do more and someone less. Even with legs, most people cannot run. So, socially, if we create a situation that does not set up discrimination or an atmosphere that is not overlay dripping with sentimental pity, there would be no problem. If you treat your friend as you treat yourself, he would be fine. Do not treat him with any self-conscious sympathy because you see him as an object of pity. Physically, he cannot do a few things, you can help them with those. For the rest of it, just treat him as you would any other human being. Society needs to be mature enough to deal with those with disabilities. If they are treated as normal, their suffering will disappear because their suffering is not physical. Pain is physical, but suffering is entirely psychological. Now, you could sit at home right now and weep because you cannot play soccer like Ronaldinho. You could consider yourself disadvantaged and handicapped, but it is foolish to do this, either to yourself or to another person. Offer some physical assistance to those who need it, but do not over exaggerate their problem and make them feel like a victim. Next sutra is, when there is no imprint of karma in conscious experience, every action and experience becomes liberating. Next question is, does karma presuppose past lives? Sadhguru, do I have to believe in rebirth in order to understand karma? Sadhguru answers, no, it is not necessary. Never mind if somebody else is talking about past lifetimes. When you are looking at your karma, just look at those areas of bondage that are a reality for you. Start from where your experience begins. You can start only from where you are. Efforts to start with something that is not in your experience will lead to hallucinatory states. From the moment of your birth to the present moment, examine the way you think and feel. At least since your birth, you can see your past actions have been ruling you in so many ways, and the way you think, feel, understand and express yourself now will affect your future. Let us not talk about those things that are not in your realm of experience. Otherwise, your entire life could pass in self deception. These deceptions could make you a popular conversationalist at a dinner party. They may carry you across one evening, but they won't carry you across life and death. If I tell you about your past lives, I am merely giving you a story of belief, not an experience. A belief system will not offer your growth. It offers you only solace and entertainment. Solace or entertainment. If I tell you that God will look after you, it will offer you only solace. Solace is like tranquilizer. It means you are only getting deeper into entanglement. It will not liberate you. Right now, you are not able to handle the memory of this very lifetime. You still suffer what happened to you 10 years ago. When you are in this condition, if you remember what happened to you 10 lifetimes ago, it will drive you nuts. It will drive you nuts. So, there is no point speculating about earlier lifetimes. At the same time, don't dismiss the idea either. You can simply acknowledge that you do not know. For now, you could simply see whatever you call past time as unconscious layers of memory in the mind. If you meditate and attain heightened level of awareness, the unconscious layer of the mind that are ruling you from within could be broken down, dissolved. Gautama the Buddha described his lifetimes in great detail, including all his animal lives, right down to the state of a single cell organism. His description parallels Darwin's theory of evolution in many ways. Now you could see this as a journey into the deepest layers of the unconscious mind. Gautama could access all this within his unconsciousness without the help of a microscope, simply because he turned inward. Countless yogis have done this. On the level of information, it will not help you to know anything about your past lives, but on the deeper energy level, undergoing previous experiences can help. What looking into the past can do is to help you arrive at a deeper understanding of what makes up the persons you call myself. There are layers and layers of memory in the unconsciousness. In unconscious, karma, samyama, an advanced spiritual program we do at ISSA is a meditation that brings layers of the unconscious mind to the surface to dissolve them. Anything that is karmic dissolves only when the discerning mind is in function. If you just leave it unexamined, it hardens into a tendency. These tendencies are working upon you all the time. I know today there is a big psychological circus going on in the form of past life regressions. Much of this is pure hallucination. You need to understand that this mind is an incredible instrument. It can deceive you in many subtle ways. Suppose you realize your neighbor's dog was your husband in your previous life. How would it help you? Whether you now go and kiss him or throw stones at him does not matter. Both are dangerous. If you throw stones at him, you will get into trouble with the neighbor. If you kiss him, you will get in trouble with the dog. But on a different plane, if you can bring this memory into your experience, then it becomes a way of liberating yourself. In Samyama, no suggestions are given to you, no guidance is given to you, but the process allows layers and layers of the past to surface and work themselves out by moving you to a certain level of intense awareness. You are now free of several impulses and tendencies. The other advantage of a process like this is that it can break some of your illusions. Right now, you consider your life to be your home, your spouse, your children, your work. But suppose you looked more deeply and saw that you had gone through many lifetimes, many spouses, dozens of children, enacted the same old charades, the same anger, the same jealousy, the same hatred, the same ambition, the same foolishness, and died frustrated each time. Once you have a clear vision of this, your present illusions can be dismantled very easily. Any amount of teaching cannot accomplish this. Just looking into the past can make you feel absolutely stupid. The more you have seen something, the less fascinating it the less fascinating it becomes. If you see that you have enacted the same patterns again and again, they become less compelling. If you look back on dozens of lives, you will have no urge to go through the same nonsense again and again. Once you know that the mortal way is just a repetition, you will seek another way, the eternal way. No one really wants to keep repeating the same rigmarole time and again. Few are the foolish, most people are just forgetful. The problem is that when you undergo experiences unconsciously, you do not learn from them. It does not matter how many times it happens. If you keep forgetting, you will repeat the same action. If it is a conscious experience, however, it will always transform you. In Samyama, you do not work out your karma on the level of memory, but on the level of conscious energy experience. Even now, your personality is a projection of many past lives, but this is an unconscious projection. If this becomes a conscious projection, you will see that the anger or jealousy you are experiencing right now will be transformed into love and compassion. If you see that your rage and resistance are only because of past influences, they will transform instantly into something positive. It is because you cannot see that your present personality is just a projection of the past that you cling to it. Once it happened, a 70-year-old man who had great fear of flying gathered all his courage and decided to take a flight. He flew on a small aircraft. Once they landed, he went up to the pilot with a flushed face and thanked him. I want to thank you for both trips, he said gratefully. What do you mean both trips? Asked the pilot. You flew only once. No, I flew twice, said the passenger. This was my first and last trip. Experience is like this. I experiencing consciously. There is no imprint of karma. Every experience and action becomes liberating. Once you have tested something consciously, there is no need to keep revisiting it. That aspect of karma is finished. Next question is, so assuming previous lifetimes exist, how does the machinery work? Does the child select its parents, or do the parents determine the karmic inheritance of their child? Sadhguru answers, yes, the child selects the parents, but selection does not mean that the child choose consciously. It is like this: if we let a whole group of people into a hall, each one goes and finds their own place. The reason you choose a particular place is your karma. If your karma is back pain, you go and settle next to a wall at the back. If your karma is that of a student who always liked to hide in class, you may choose to sit behind a big person. If your karma is about wanting to be noticed, you may choose the front row. These decisions may be unconscious, but they do operate. Similarly, your karma makes you settle down in a particular home. In other words, you choose an environment with which you may share tendencies or attributes. It is not that two people are named as parents for you. That is not how it works. It is just a plug waiting for a suitable socket. Once it finds the appropriate place with certain similarities or affinities, it settles down there. That is all. This is why elaborate care was taken in traditional India over arrangements and rituals around conception. To some degree, a few simple rituals still prevail. For every wedding, an auspicious date was chosen because that night was the night when the woman would conceive. So the right time of the month was fixed and a pleasant atmosphere and energetic situation created so that the conception happened in the best possible conditions. This was both for woman and for the new life that was being created within her. If conception happened in a certain state of love and joy, it would naturally attract a certain type of life. If it happened in a state of unpleasantness, it would attract another type of life. Of course, this happened in a traditional context when the couple in question was young. Today, no such social arrangement is possible, but couples are still arrange a situation of great pleasantness and energetic aliveness for themselves to ensure that they produce a better next generation. Now we cannot generalize on these matters. This does not mean that happy condition will produce only a happy child. A mango can attract a fly, but the same fly is also attracted to a lump of shit. Karmic attraction can work in different ways. Sometimes a disturbed state of mind may attract a beautiful being because one type of personality might be drawn to its opposite. So, don't start judging the kind of person you are based on your children. A child may be wonderful in spite of you, but essentially tendencies drive a child to a particular home, and because the child comes to you in such a tender state, you have the capability to influence them to a great extent. You can enhance either their pleasantness or their unpleasantness. You do not have total control, of course. Nobody has complete control over another. With children, the less you try to influence them, the more they are influenced by you. The more you try to influence them, the less successful you will be. Now, it is because of karma that even an unborn child has a certain nascent personality. If you ask women who have had more than 2 or 3 children, they will tell you that every child did not behave in the same way in the womb. The basis or the seed of the personality is already present. This is what we refer to as karma. The karmic body is already present in its entirety in the prenatal stage. By the time the child is born, it has as much of karmic body as you have. It is only that the physical body has not yet filled out. However, this does not mean that the child is at the mercy of their parents' karma. Certain choices still exist. Let's say your father was a criminal. Now you have the choice to follow in his footsteps and become one, or if you have the awareness and intelligence, you might exercise the choice to opt for another kind of life. The genes may be the same, the environment may be ridden with crime, but some will still grow beyond it. Once there is a certain distance between you and all that you have gathered, you can make anything of your life. Once there is a distance between you and your karma, you are free. Next sutra is, you cannot own life, you can only live it. Next question is, you have said that after that one operates only according to one's tendencies. This means working out karma in such a state will take a long time. But is it possible to work it out in the disembodied state, or does one have to take on another body and enter the human form again? Sadhguru answers, the question you are asking is like this: I was driving my car and I fell asleep. In my sleep, can I still go where I want to go? Of course you will go, but go where? Because that's the nature of unconsciousness. When you are unconscious, where you go is not your choice. Even a dead leaf goes somewhere, but where? It cannot decide. The wind will decide. Even a little ant knows where exactly it wants to go, but any being that's become totally unconscious cannot choose. Once you have lost the discerning part of your mind, you have no choice. Whichever way the tendencies push you, that's where you will go. Now your question is, can I undo my karmic stuff in a disembodied state? I thought you were planning to do it here when you are still alive. Why do you want to do it after you lose your body and lose discernment? The most important dimension of your existence right now is that you have a discerning mind. If you have any sense, you will choose what is best for this life. That is the most important thing. Will you use your discernment to make this into a most wonderful life there is? This is the only question that counts. But yes, when you make choices out of awareness and discernment, then undoing your karma is very rapid. When you do not have a discerning mind, some aspects will continue to be undone because of the natural process of evolution, but the whole process is inordinately slow. It happened. A man got an appointment with God. He asked God, Father, is it true that what is $1 billion for us in America is just a penny for you? And is it true that what is million years for us is just a second or moment for you? God said, yes, my son, that's how it is. That is the proportion between where you live and where I live. The man said, my father, just so I can always remember you, would you give me a penny? God said, just wait a moment. So that's the scale we are talking about. Don't even think of unwinding karma in the disembodied state. When you are unconscious, when you are lost your faculties, a minuscule amount of karma may be undone. but that's not problem. It should not even be thought of. There are traditions, including the yogic one, in which if one has done substantial inner work and some small amount remains undone, some external assistance will be given after one loses the body. Outside help is offered to break the karmic bondage. Now, the next question from some people will inevitably be, Sadhguru, if I stop doing all my practices, will you take care of me after I am dead? So, don't forget, I said if substantial inner work is done and only a little karma is left, don't concern yourself with what happening to you after you die. If you wish to assist others who have died, there are certain dimensions and possibility of sadhana that I will be opening up in the coming years, so we can genuinely do something to help those who are in the disembodied state. Next question is, what happens to beings who have died when their energy body is still vibrant? If the pranic or energy body is still vibrant, such a being cannot find another body for some time. The energy body needs to settle down. This is why those who die in an accident or suicide, or who contract some sudden illness, sometimes linger on in a disembodied state. Such a pranic body still carries desires, longings, strong inclinations. These have to run their course. It is a limbo condition, and traditionally in India several rituals were performed to hasten the course of such a being. Some of these rituals were just about psychological solace for the living, but even today, if these rituals are performed by those who know what they are doing, they can accelerate the process for such a being. People long to die peacefully for this reason. The prana or life energy has run its full course and can easily disentangle itself. It is like a ripe fruit falling off a tree. The moment it falls with a ripe fruit around it, the seed will immediately take root with the necessary food around it. See, the seed has the necessary manure around it. A fruit is actually manure for the seed. We just happen to eat it before it actually becomes manure. Another function of the fruit is to attract animals and insects so that they will carry it elsewhere and drop it in places where it can take root again. So, when people die after a full life cycle, they fall without a struggle, disease or injury. The prana reaches a certain level of sedateness and disentangles itself. Now, what we call Mahasamadhi is the reverse, to bring the prana to a certain state of intensity and maturity in the structure so that it cannot be held in a physical form anymore. The reason yogis seek such a death is because it is natural, effortless. If you die with a disease or accident, there is violence in the death. The residual impact of that violence endures in so many ways in the subtle body. Now you may wonder, does time exist for the disembodied being? Yes. There is cyclical time in the disembodied state, but not in the way we understand it here. If the energy body is in a state of great pleasantness, there may be no urgency to take on a physical embodiment again. If it is restless, the urgency is greater. Think of it in terms of your own life. If you are depressed, 1 minute feels like a day. If you are joyful, 1 day is like a minute. For a suffering energy body, a single day may seem like 100 years, but for joyful one, the 100 years could seem like a day. So, for those who have died without living out a full life cycle, the allotted karma or prarabdha has to wear itself out. The pranic body has to come to a certain state of passivity or inertness. This happens when there is no longer any active karmic substance. Now, the new allotment or installment of prarabdha will begin to manifest itself. As this happens, the energy body regains its vibrancy and will then take on another physical body. Next question is, does anyone ever manage to work out their accumulated karma or sanchita in a single lifetime? If one keeps accumulating karma even as one sheds it, it seems like an endless process. Sadhguru answers, for the enlightened being, as I said before, the challenge is about how to accumulate karma. For the enlightened being, it is like this: you make sure you don't burn up all your karma. You burn down your warehouse to one sack. Then when you see you have no way to live, you carry a handbag for today's expense. You create a purpose and then work it out. That is the strategy for the enlightened being. But for the seeker, I would say, don't worry about getting rid of karma, just concern yourself with how not to acquire new karma. This anxiety, how this anxiety, I want to get rid of my karma, will itself breed more karma. So don't get caught up with how to burn it all up. Karma will melt down with the process of life itself, living in itself, burning karma. Karma is not some kind of punishment, it is just information. How you carry your information will determine whether it becomes burdensome, restrictive, painful, joyful, or liberating. It all depends on how you carry it. Nowadays, your phone alone does not carry all your memory. An entire cloud follows you around everywhere. If you learn to carry your karma like this, it's good. If your karma follows you but does not sit on your head, what does it matter? You aren't burdened, so the bigger the cloud, the better. Having more gigabytes is always better, isn't it? Now, how do you not gather karma? As we have seen, the simplest thing you can do is to make your involvement absolute, not selective. The air that you breathe, the sound you hear, the ground you sit on, be absolutely involved with all of it. Unbridled involvement is the nature of life itself. The tree standing here is involved with everything, the earth, the water, the breeze, the sky, everything. Life will blossom only if involvement is total. Once you discriminate, karma multiplies big time. Once you discriminate, karma multiplies big time. This is what every human being should aspire to. Discrimination only on the level of action, not involvement. Action is necessarily limited. It involves a certain expenditure of energy, time, competence, and other factors. Discretion is necessary only on the level of action, otherwise you will waste yourself. But involvement is an internal state and it needs to be all inclusive. Ideas based on selectivity, this is my house, that is my work, this is my country, are relevant only on the level of external behavior and action. It is a fact that you cannot physically give birth to all the people on this planet, but internally you can be involved as you be with your own children. You would be with your own children. You may not be able to feed or educate every child, but you can still be involved wholeheartedly with all of creation. The moment you try to curtail and concretize this natural movement of life that is constantly trying to evolve and burst forth, you turn into a monument. Life cannot be owned. The need to own life is responsible for much suffering on this planet. Let us say you meet someone and say, I love you. It feels really nice for 3 days. Then you think you must capture this love. Well, you ended up with a marriage. Nothing wrong with that, but the beauty of an experience cannot be captured. It cannot be institutionalized. This is the fundamental reason karma has become a problem. It is because you are trying to capture life. You cannot own life, you can only live it. Next sutra is, right now you are like a bubble that say, the air that I hold is my lungs, is my air. You still have to exhale. Okay, I repeat it. Right now you are like a bubble that says, the air that I hold in my lungs is my air. You still have to exhale. Next question is, I have always wondered about this. If there are a certain number of beings that need to be liberated from their karma, why is the human population always increasing? Where is all the new karmic substance coming from? Sadhguru answers, the number game works only with the physical dimension. In the non-physical dimension, it is meaningless. You are confusing the non-physical dimension with the physical. With a single person's karmic body, it is possible to make a million children. This does not mean a million people have to die and a million women have to get pregnant and wait to receive those million beings. A single karmic body can manifest in a million wombs. So this being that you call me right now is not a quantity. I always use negative terminology so your imagination does not fly away with you. Let me just describe this. You as empty space or darkness. sorry, let me just describe this you as empty space or darkness. If I describe you as light or as a god, you will start turning hallucinatory. If I tell you that you are light, you will immediately tell your neighbor that you are divine light. If I tell you that you are God, you will start turning delusional. There is not very much you can imagine about emptiness, so let's stick with this description. So, this empty space within you is like a bubble. Karma is the wall of the bubble. Without karmic substance, you have no existence. It is only because of karmic substance, that you are glued to the body. If all your karma is removed, you cannot be held in the body. Even though you may slip out of one physical body, the karmic substance is still there. So even if this body loses its vibrancy, the karmic substance will find another body. Now when we say we want liberation or mukti, what we really are saying is that we want to prick this bubble in such a way that the enclosed emptiness become one with the emptiness outside. Once you burst a bubble, the air inside becomes part of everything around it, doesn't it? It works the same way with the karmic bubble. Enlightenment also means the same thing. It means the bubble has burst. For most beings, the moment of enlightenment and the moment of leaving the body are the same. Only a few who know the tricks of the body, its fundamental mechanics, are able to retain the physical for a length of time after their enlightenment. Now, if life energies become overly intense, you cannot retain the body. Also, if life energies become very feeble, you cannot retain the body. So, only if life energies are within a certain bandwidth of intensity can the body be retained. This is why there are two types of yoga in the world. One type is about withdrawing from the world. This means making the life energy so feeble that you can drop the body. Another type of yoga is about reviving up the energies to a high pitch so that the physical cannot hold one anymore. Socially, the reviving up approach may be more appreciated, but existentially one is not superior to the other, both achieve the same end. So there is no such thing as you and me really. Right now you are like a bubble that says the air that I hold in my lungs is my air, but you still have to exhale. When you do, your air becomes somebody else's air and somebody else's air becomes your air. There is no such thing as my air, but when you hold it in your lungs, it becomes you for that little period of time. So that limited aspect of the divine that you hold within you, you call your soul. In Sanskrit, we call it Atma. We differentiate it from the divine, which we call Paramatma. If the bubble breaks, it's all Paramatma. Even now, it is all Paramatma, but we speak of the soul as our Atma because we like to believe that the air in our lungs is ours and the food in our stomachs is ours. We believe our flesh, blood and bone are ours and even us. In fact, Atma or soul is just an imaginary creation. It is true in your current context, but existentially it is not. In truth, there is only Paramatma, but we end up fighting over my divinity and your divinity and my air and your air. So, single person's karmic body can be made into a million children. The same karma can be worked out through several beings. There is no fixed arithmetic so far as souls are concerned. Atma is our own creation. It is relevant only in a limited subjective context. This can happen and has in fact happened in the past. Let us say that my body has become defunct and I am unable to sustain it. I have to leave it, but I am in a hurry to complete some unfinished work that might perhaps take me 5 more years. I may not want to go through a womb, be born, grow up, maybe get lost again and have to do sadhana to find my way back again to my central mission. So I might choose to find a suitable adult body that is going to be discarded by someone else and inhabit it. This means I can complete my unfinished business. The karmic material can definitely take on more than one body. It is capable of supporting more than one physical form. I have spoken in the past of how this happened with me in an earlier lifetime when I was Sadguru Sri Brahma and life situations made it impossible for me to continue my mission to consecrate the Dhyana Linga, I took on the body of a child yogi who had left his body early. For a while I managed two bodies and made a futile attempt to consecrate the Dhyana Linga. I attempted this because I knew that the physical form for that body as Sadguru Sri Brahma was going to be over in a few months. The tradition also has stories of other yogis who maintained two different bodies to fulfill two different kinds of karma. There were yogis who inhabited the body of an ascetic and a householder in order to fulfill certain dimensions of activity that could not be carried out with a single body. There have also been cases of two yogis sharing a single body. It is sometimes simpler to share another yogi's body and fulfill one's karma obligations rather than to go through the process of finding a womb and starting over. Next question is, will the million children produced from the same karmic body be similar? Not necessarily. There are many other factors at work too: genetic influences, family influences, social influences. The karmic body represents only a certain amount of information. The rest comes from parents, education, society, cultural environment and host of other factors. So it does not mean that the karmic body will always manifest as the same type of human being. Let's talk about next sutra. In maintaining distance from your thought and emotion, you can become available to the grace of the greatest being of the past. Next question is, what exactly do you mean by collective karma? How does individual karma intersect with collective karma? Sadhguru said, the problem is that you are thinking again in terms of an individual as separate from everything else. There is no such thing. Today, psychologists speak of that aspect of the individual unconscious that is connected with a larger collective unconsciousness. This is what we mean by collective karma. Because we perform certain actions, karma accumulates. This has individual and collective consequences. Imagine a pond full of water. You go there and scoop out a bucket of water. Then you scoop out another. Is the first bucket full any different from the second? Can you speak of this water and that water? It is the same with life. You cannot speak of this life and that life. At this moment, if you are willing, the karma of Adi Yogi, the first yogi and first guru, can become yours. It has already become ours in many ways. There are so many things he achieved through his karma that we are making use of today. It has become our karma. You may never have gone through the sadhana he underwent, but you can enjoy the fruits of his karma because it is simply there, available to all. This means that Adi Yogi karma is large enough to accommodate many other beings. This is why so many realized beings have performed action. They do not need to. Action is no longer needed for them, but they perform it in order to produce more positive karma. Rather than a single yogi, 10 can come with the same karma. This is a tremendous possibility. Do not think of action as belonging to a particular person. Every thought that you generate finds certain imprint in his universe forever and ever. Every thought that ever occurred to Adi Yogi, every thought that ever occurred to Krishna or the Buddha, all this still has a presence. Now, if you create the right kind of situation within yourself, you can access this karma. You could receive Adi Yogi's thoughts, or even you create another kinds of situation, you could receive the Buddha's thought. In other words, their karma is becoming your karma. In maintaining distance from your thought and emotion, you can become available to the grace of the greatest being of the past. But do not think that you can perform any action you choose and still gather someone else's good karma for yourself. There has been a great emphasis in the yogic tradition on cultivating the right attitude towards life, because depending on your attitude or quality, you attract that kind of thought, emotion and experience towards yourself. Why has there been so much talk of God, or in the yogic tradition, why is there no mention of God but only of the ultimate guru, Adi Yogi or the first guru? It is only because this helps you become the right kind of receptacle. Although you are not able to become spiritual by effort, by enhancing your receptivity, you will slowly draw the right thoughts, the right emotions, the right feelings, the right blessings towards you. It will definitely happen. So karma does not belong to a person alone. It exists and it can be attracted depending on your receptivity. So all the karma you carry is not actually your karma. In some narrowly individual sense. Because of the karma that you have performed, you have attracted this kind of karma to yourself in this lifetime. This is the significance of the tradition of sending a child to a guru at an early age. The abode of the guru was called Gurukula, literally the Guru's family. The Guru's karma was seen as so good that spending time with him was a way of downloading some of his karma. The child might belong to any family, but going to Gurukula meant you become part of Guru's clan. What was his become yours? Learning that might have taken lifetimes become yours too. Your life was put on fast forward, which accelerated your inner evaluation. The reason there is so much emphasis in the tradition on creating good karma is just this. If you generate a lot of good karma in the world, the new generation will be born with better karma. The situation of the world will now automatically improve. Those new beings who catch this karma and come into the world will in turn attract more positive karma and generate more as well. So don't think of quantities. Once your consciousness rises beyond this sense of separatedness, where are the quantities? There are none. There is only one, and it is not even entirely correct to say there is one. When 10 does not exist, 1 does not exist either. Since language is itself rooted in duality, we cannot escape the quantifying process. But the truth is that there is no one and no two. This cannot be understood, it can only be experienced. So there is just one common karma, because there is only one common existence, but based on your quality you attract a particular kind of karma to yourself. The moment of death is particularly important in determining the kind of quality you have and the kind of karma you attract. So if you die in anger, in hatred, in misery or in pain, you attract one kind of karma. If you die in peace or blissfulness, you attract another kind of karma. In the last 40 seconds of a person's lifetime, many lifetimes of accumulated karma play out in fast forward. In those crucial 40 seconds, if a person manages to stay aware, they can drop lifetimes of karma. It does not matter what kind of life they have lived. If they are in a consecrated space or if they have done some spiritual practice and manage to stay conscious, that intense phase will wipe them clean and they can dissolve their karma altogether. This is why every religious tradition places an emphasis on dying in peace. This is simply because this gives one a better opportunity the next time around. Dying in joy or love is a wonderful way to die. Dying in what the yogic tradition calls the samadhi state is the ultimate way to die. This means that while you are living, you walk consciously into death. Now let's talk about next sutra. You have the choice and ability to be any way you want in a given moment. That is the freedom and the curse. Most human beings are suffering their freedom. Next question is, what about animals? Do they have karma too? Sadhguru, yes, animals have karma, but it is very limited and different from the human karma. An animal lives an instinctive life. This is the only difference between the human being and animal. Only when you exercise your intelligence is a distinction set up between you and an animal. So when you live by your own instincts, you accumulate karma, but in a very limited way. When you employ your intelligence, suddenly the karma acquires a different significance. An ant creates karma, but all ants create the same type of karma. There are no difference between their karmas because there is no difference in their desire. Their desire is to eat, procreate and protect themselves. They want to eat the dead cockroach in your home and they want to make sure you do not step on them. So desire and fear immediately create a karmic structure. But it is simple one. The structure becomes very complicated and intricate only when life becomes human, because now you create karma with volition. Simple karma can just be snapped and discarded. When there is a conscious volition, karma gets very complicated. For an animal, whatever happened to it in the past is recorded. If it dies a violent death, that gets recorded. Because of this, there may be a certain fear in the animal, but the karma does not manifest itself as dominantly as it does in a human being. When there is the freedom to decide how to be, karma gets more complicated. Tigers have no real choice other than to be a tiger. They go by their instincts. They have no choices as we know them. They cannot transform themselves into vegetarians or get married or become yogis. Their life is fixed, so there is not much karmic action. Certain personality differences still exist. They are angry tigers, docile tigers, lazy tigers, but there are no major differences. Human being on the other hand is not fixed. You have the choice and the ability to be way you want in a given moment. That is the freedom and the curse. Most human beings are suffering their freedom. Next sutra is, every human being is in the process of becoming divine. Collaborating with nature's plan is all you need to do. Next question is, so how does an animal evolve on the karmic ladder? Sadhguru, life evolves by its own nature. Nature takes care of it. From the lower animal to the higher, from single cell organism to those with a central nervous system, the evolutionary journey just happened. It is not a choice, because everything is unconscious and instinctual. For animal, there is no good and bad, no right and wrong for them. Nature is just giving them a free ride. They move effortlessly from one grade of life to the other. It is just the flow of life itself. And at the certain point, the animal attains the human form. Now as a human being, you have the freedom to decide your destiny. Nature no longer decides it for you. The human problem right now is freedom. That is the paradox. You are free now to make yourself miserable. You are free to make yourself joyous. You are free to live like a god. You are free to live like a demon. Nature gave you freedom because you are now evolved enough to make a mature choice. In short, nature trusted your intelligence, but unfortunately human beings take their own time to make use of that intelligence. Every human being is in the process of becoming divine. Every human being is in the process of awakening to their own divinity. Whether this happens today, tomorrow, 10 years or 10,000 years later is always open to question. But once you see that life is moving toward its ultimate nature of its own accord, you also put your energies into it and go faster. That is, you turn consciously spiritual. Collaborating with nature's plan is all you need to do. Existence is not in hurry, but if you are, you could join hands with existence and reach your goal much more quickly. But if you are enjoying fooling around here, go right ahead. Existence is eternal, so you have all the eternity before you. There is no hurry, the choice is yours. Every spiritual process is about transforming the animal nature within you. As you move towards a divine possibility, you must take care of your animal nature with the right kind of awareness and inner work. Merely pretending to be moral won't do. Many human beings who project themselves as very principled and upright find themselves consumed by their animal impulses, whether lust or greed. Later in their lives, they completely lose their grip over themselves in their later years. So dissolving the animal nature is the aim of a daily spiritual process. Next question is, can a human being return to the animal stage in another lifetime? No. However, some yogis may take on an animal form just to dissolve earlier karma. Others manage the animal stage in this life itself. Maybe someone is a yogi in this life, but for all their spiritual attainments, food remains a compulsion. So it is possible that they may choose not to return as a human being, which has its own complex entanglements. They may choose to return as an animal just to work out the simple food karma. Now, they don't get entangled with all the other processes of growing up human. And as an animal, which is a simpler form, they gather minimal karma. This makes it easy to break their food karma and not accumulated any other unwanted entanglements. Once this karma has been worked out, the same life return as a much more accomplished human being. But the karma must be really base for a being to take on an animal form. There have been stories about a 20th century Indian mystic Ramana Maharshi and how he granted mukti or liberation to a cow. Now this is possible only if the animal is already a spiritually sophisticated being that is simply tenating an animal body. Such an animal may find itself unconsciously drawn to the presence of a yogi like Ramana, or else it is possible for a yogi to take on another being's karma in their own body and in a single moment dissolve that life and release it. This means the cow lifts the body, the yogi then takes that life on his body for just a moment and liberates it. These are rare occurrences, however, they are not impossible, but they are rare. There have been instances of spiritual adepts taking on other bodies in the yogic lore. Let us say there is a person who is close to their spiritual destination but finds their life coming to its close. Now an accomplished yogi is capable of moving into this person's body, releasing this person's karma totally. This means you dissolve them, liberate them. Now the yogi can inhabit this body